In the world of the bold and the beautiful, disaster rarely arrives in a single, explosive instant. More often, it gathers like static in the air, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. It settles into rooms before anyone speaks, lingers between people who claim to love each other, and wraps itself around every conversation until even the smallest choice begins to feel like the beginning of a war. That is exactly the kind of day unfolding as Wednesday, April 15th approaches, because this is no longer just about a bruised romance, a jealous rival, or a family disagreement dressed up as concern. This is about pressure. It is about manipulation passing itself off as wisdom. It is about a young woman standing at the edge of a future that others keep trying to choose for her, while the people around her insist they only want what is best. And perhaps most dangerous of all, it is about a woman like Ivy finally sensing that time is running out and deciding that if this is truly her last chance to control the story, then she will have to push harder than ever before, even if that means exposing the ugliest parts of herself in the process. For Ivy, the situation has become intolerably fragile. She can feel the ground shifting beneath her, and that is what makes her so dangerous now. There are people who scheme for power, and there are people who scheme out of fear. Ivy belongs to the second category, though she would never admit that to herself. She prefers to imagine that she is strategic, perceptive, wiser than the people around her, able to see the emotional traps that Elektra cannot yet recognize. But beneath that self-image is something far less noble: panic. Ivy is beginning to understand that the version of reality she has been constructing for Elektra cannot hold forever. Too many emotions are rising to the surface. Too many questions are pressing in from every side. Too many people are refusing to behave according to her plan. What she once regarded as careful guidance is becoming desperation, and desperation always carries a smell that eventually reaches everyone in the room. That is why this moment matters so much. Ivy may not say it out loud, but she knows she is nearing the end of the road she has been trying to build. For all her certainty, for all her interference, for all her determination to steer Elektra toward RJ and away from Will, she can sense that the window is closing. Elektra is no longer as passive as she once was. Will is not retreating. RJ is too emotional to remain a useful piece on the board forever, and the atmosphere around them is growing too volatile for Ivy to keep pretending that this is simply a family discussion about what is best. The truth is far uglier than that. This has become a contest of wills, and Ivy is terrified of losing. At the center of all of this is Elektra, though it would be more accurate to say that everyone around her is trying to place themselves at the center of her life. That is the cruel irony of her position. Everyone speaks as if the future belongs to her, but nearly every conversation about that future is really about someone else's need. Will wants redemption, a chance to prove that what they had was real and worth saving. RJ wants validation, or perhaps comfort, or perhaps simply the hope that he might matter more than the latest Spencer man to drift into the emotional orbit of a Forrester woman. Ivy wants control, even if she disguises it as protection. Ridge wants peace in the office and dignity in the family. Everyone has a stake in what Elektra will decide, and that is precisely why her decision has become so heavy. It is no longer just a choice between men, or even a choice between past pain and future possibility. It is a choice about identity. It is a choice about whether she will continue to live as someone shaped by the will of others, or whether she will start becoming the person she has not yet had the space to define. Elektra's tragedy is that she has not been given the quiet necessary to hear herself think. Her emotions have been crowded by other voices for too long. Advice, warnings, judgments, pressure, assumptions, all of it has been thrown at her until even her own instincts have started to sound unfamiliar. She is supposed to choose, and everyone acts as though choice is freedom, but choice without clarity is its own kind of trap. The more the people around her push, the more impossible it becomes to know whether what she feels is truly hers or simply a reaction to being cornered. That is why this episode carries such emotional force. It is not just the continuation of a love triangle or a family feud. It is the portrait of a woman being pressed toward a decision while standing inside a storm she did not create. Will, for his part, enters this moment with a blend of hope and impatience that makes him both sympathetic and dangerous. He has spent enough time feeling misunderstood, enough time watching the narrative of his relationship with Elektra become distorted by interference and suspicion, and now he believes he finally has the opening he has been waiting for. Melissa Dillon moving out of the spare room at his beach house is not, in itself, a grand romantic event. It is practical. It is logistical. It is the kind of life detail that normally would not carry much emotional significance. But in this situation, it becomes symbolic. Elektra had earlier suggested that maybe there could still be a future between them if Dillon were no longer living there. That condition, whether it was spoken from genuine discomfort or from a desire to delay, became fixed in Will's mind as a barrier that could eventually be removed. Now, in his eyes, it has been removed. The obstacle is gone. The path is open. And so he arrives at Elektra not merely with information, but with expectation. There is something painfully human about that expectation. Will wants a clean equation. He wants to believe that if the practical problem has been solved, then the emotional problem can finally be solved too. He wants to imagine that love is waiting on the other side of a misunderstanding, that all he has to do is show up honestly and ask for another chance. But relationships do not work like that, especially not in a world already polluted by mistrust, manipulation, and family agendas. What Will sees as a hopeful fresh start may feel to Elektra like one more demand arriving before she has had time to heal. That is not because she no longer cares about him. In fact, her feelings may be what make the moment so difficult. The more she still loves him, the more frightening it becomes to imagine choosing wrong, trusting too quickly, or reopening a wound before it is closed. Will is sincere, but sincerity does not erase damage. It only sharpens the ache of what has been lost. Still, he will ask. He will press forward with the kind of earnest certainty that Spencer men often mistake for courage. He may tell Elektra that they can begin again, that the future she hinted at can become real, that whatever happened before does not have to define what happens next. He may believe that this is romance, and in some ways it is, but it is also pressure, even if it comes wrapped in warmth. It asks Elektra to make meaning out of a practical shift before she has fully processed the emotional wreckage behind it. It asks her to translate one external change into a complete internal readiness. And because Will believes in what he is offering, he may not even recognize how much weight his hope places on her. That is where Ivy moves in with all the sharpened instinct of someone who knows the board is slipping away. She hears what Will is offering and immediately understands the danger. To anyone else, it might sound like a man simply asking for another chance. To Ivy, it sounds like defeat approaching. If Elektra allows herself to believe that Will can now offer her a future unburdened by the earlier complications, then everything Ivy has done to steer her elsewhere begins to fall apart. So Ivy will not waste a second. She will not stand back and allow the emotional moment to breathe. She will enter it the way she always does, with a voice full of certainty and a mind already several moves ahead. She will frame Will not as a hopeful partner, but as a mistake waiting to happen again. She will present herself as the one person who sees the truth clearly. And because she knows direct orders will only go so far, she will likely cloak her intervention in emotional logic, telling Elektra that she deserves stability, safety, and a future that is not built on disappointment. That is the genius and the poison of Ivy's manipulation. She rarely speaks in a way that immediately exposes her. She does not often sound like a villain, at least not at first. She sounds like someone who has thought deeply, someone who is calm while others are reckless, someone who sees patterns that younger hearts refuse to notice. She does not just oppose Will. She undermines the emotional foundation beneath him. She makes him seem like a risk, like a source of chaos, like a man who belongs to a family that has always complicated Forrester lives. And then, with almost surgical precision, she redirects the conversation toward RJ. RJ is useful to Ivy for reasons that have less to do with his actual compatibility with Elektra and more to do with what he represents. He is family. He is familiar. He is safe in a way that old houses are safe, even when the walls are cracking, because at least one knows where every doorway leads. To Ivy, RJ is a solution because he keeps the emotional drama inside the boundaries she can understand and influence. A relationship between Elektra and RJ would not merely give Elektra a new beginning. It would give Ivy continued access, continued relevance, continued authority in the shaping of Elektra's life. That is why she pushes so relentlessly in that direction. Her motives are not purely romantic on RJ's behalf, nor are they purely protective toward Elektra. They are territorial. She wants to keep the future within reach of her own hand. Yet the more she pushes, the more visible the machinery becomes. Manipulation can survive a long time when it hides behind restraint, but Ivy is losing the ability to be restrained. The pressure of the moment strips polish from her performance. Her opposition to Will becomes too immediate, too forceful, too revealing. Her insistence that Elektra focus on RJ begins to sound less like gentle guidance and more like command. And once a manipulator begins to sound desperate, the spell weakens. This is why Wednesday feels like such an important turning point. Ivy does not yet realize that by trying harder, she is actually exposing more. While all of this emotional warfare unfolds around Elektra's future, Ridge is dealing with another front in the same larger conflict, the poisoned atmosphere inside Forrester Creations. The office, which should function as a symbol of family pride, creative focus, and business discipline, has become a stage for personal grievance. Ridge has seen the consequences already. Will and RJ recently came to blows there, turning a workplace into a battleground for masculine frustration and emotional insecurity. Whatever sympathy Ridge may feel for RJ's jealousy or outrage, whatever irritation he may carry toward a Spencer disrupting the peace yet again, he cannot allow that behavior to stand. The office matters to him not only as a place of business, but as an extension of family identity. Chaos in that space feels like humiliation. It feels like the private dysfunction of the Forresters being dragged into the fluorescent light where everyone can see. So Ridge will speak, and when Ridge speaks in moments like these, there is always a strange mixture of truth and hypocrisy. He will warn RJ that what happened was unacceptable. He will insist that personal life cannot keep bleeding into professional space. That if RJ wants to remain part of the family business, he must learn to separate emotion from responsibility. On the surface, this is entirely reasonable. It is the kind of advice any father in his position should give. But what gives the moment depth is that Ridge is not speaking from a place of moral purity. He is speaking as a man whose own life has repeatedly blurred every line he now claims must be protected. He has dragged love, anger, betrayal, and obsession into business decisions more times than he could count. He has lived for years in the very overlap he now condemns. And yet perhaps that is precisely why the speech matters. Sometimes the people best equipped to recognize a destructive pattern are the ones who have spent a lifetime trapped in it. Ridge may not say all of that openly. He may not offer RJ the full honesty of admitting how often he himself has failed to keep private chaos from infecting public responsibility. But even if the self-awareness remains incomplete, the warning still lands with a certain weary truth. He is looking at his son and seeing a younger version of familiar male weakness. The inability to contain emotion when pride is wounded, the temptation to turn romantic frustration into aggression, the belief that one can punch or argue or posture one's way back into emotional control. Ridge knows where that road leads because he has walked it himself. The tragedy is that men like him often become most articulate about their mistakes only after making them too many times to count. RJ, however, is not in a state to receive advice with grace. He is still simmering. He is still replaying every moment involving Will and Elektra, still nursing the humiliation of being drawn into a conflict that makes him look volatile, possessive, and perhaps foolish. What makes RJ's situation painful is that he is not simply angry at Will. He is angry at his own emotional exposure. He likely hates how much this situation has gotten inside him, how visibly it has affected him, how easily his feelings have been manipulated and then displayed. The fight at Forrester Creations was not just about Will's treatment of Elektra. It was about RJ's inability to remain composed while watching the woman he wants remain emotionally tethered to someone else. And because he comes from a family that always turns private feelings into theater, he has probably absorbed the illusion that this kind of emotional escalation is normal, even romantic, when in reality, it only reveals how little control he has over himself. That is why Ridge's warning cuts so sharply. It is not merely a professional reprimand. It is an exposure of weakness. It tells RJ that whatever he feels, whatever pain or jealousy he carries, he is expected to master it if he wants to be taken seriously. The family name may shield him from certain consequences, but not from all of them. Ridge may even make clear that Forrester status cannot protect RJ forever if he turns the workplace into an extension of his personal turmoil. That idea alone is enough to unsettle him, because RJ has likely spent much of his life moving through a world where emotional messiness was forgiven as long as it remained inside the family myth. To hear that there are limits that even his father may not be willing to keep excusing him forces him to confront a more adult version of himself than he may be ready for. And yet, even here, the irony remains brutal. Ridge is preaching discipline while the entire family system around him continues to encourage the opposite. Forrester men are taught to feel entitled to intensity and then are scolded when intensity spills over in embarrassing ways. Women are treated as both autonomous and symbolic, loved and claimed, heard and directed, often in the same conversation. Family loyalty is praised until it threatens business order, at which point business order suddenly becomes sacred. This contradiction hangs over every scene, giving the episode its deeper tension. No one is truly operating from a clean moral position. They are all trying to preserve certain principles while violating others, all trying to restore order in a system that keeps producing chaos because chaos is built into its emotional architecture. Back in Elektra's world, that architecture is closing in. She has along one side, offering renewed possibility. She has Ivy on the other, steering her toward RJ with escalating urgency. She has the memory of what she once believed, the pain of what she has endured, and the uncertainty of what is actually true beneath all the interference. This is what makes her choice so consequential. It is not simply about whom she wants. It is about which version of reality she believes. If she believes Will, then she has to confront the possibility that much of the distance between them was manufactured or amplified by outside manipulation. If she believes Ivy, then she is accepting a future shaped by caution, family influence, and the implication that her own emotional instincts are unreliable. If she chooses RJ, she may be choosing stability, or she may be choosing safety over truth. If she chooses Will, she may be choosing love, or she may be stepping back into pain. Every road is crowded with uncertainty. That uncertainty is precisely what Ivy wants to exploit one last time. She understands that when people are emotionally overwhelmed, certainty becomes seductive. A firm voice can sound like wisdom. A confident interpretation can sound like truth. A strong opinion can feel like protection. Ivy's strategy is built on occupying that role before anyone else can. She wants to define the emotional landscape so completely that Elektra stops asking herself what she wants and starts asking what version of herself she is supposed to become. Under Ivy's influence, love is no longer love. It becomes a test of judgment. Desire becomes danger. Doubt becomes virtue. And RJ, conveniently, becomes the answer to a question Elektra may not even have asked in her own heart. But manipulation, no matter how skillful, always leaves evidence in human feeling. It creates a pressure that the body recognizes even when the mind cannot yet name it. Elektra may not have the full truth yet, but she can likely feel the suffocation of being guided too aggressively. She can likely sense that every conversation around her future feels staged, tilted, arranged. That sensation alone begins to weaken Ivy's influence, because once a person starts to feel managed, trust begins to decay. And trust, once cracked, rarely breaks neatly. It splinters across everything. It makes old reassurances sound rehearsed. It makes concern feel invasive. It makes the familiar suddenly frightening. Meanwhile, Will's position grows even more complicated because he is pressing for emotional renewal at the exact moment when the unseen structure of Ivy's interference is about to collapse. He does not yet know the full extent of what is waiting to be exposed, but the audience of fate around him is already shifting. His instincts tell him this could be the turning point that brings Elektra back to him. He is not entirely wrong. Yet what he does not understand is that the road back to love may first have to pass through humiliation, betrayal, and emotional shock. Elektra cannot simply hear that Dylan has moved out and suddenly feels safe again. She may soon have to process a much larger revelation about how her choices, suspicions, and heartbreak were manipulated by someone she trusted. That kind of revelation changes the emotional timetable completely. It means that even if Will is right, he may not immediately win. Truth often has to wound before it heals. This is where the shadow of Daphne Rose Walton becomes especially significant. Though the full confession is still waiting in the wings, its presence shapes everything. Ivy does not know exactly when the floor beneath her will vanish, but the audience can feel it coming. Daphne has seen enough. She has watched Ivy refuse every chance to do the right thing. She has watched Elektra remain trapped inside a false narrative. She has watched Will suffer under accusations and suspicions that were never allowed to resolve honestly. And she has reached the point where silence would no longer be neutrality. It would be participation. That moral shift transforms her from observer to threat, and though Wednesday may still belong to Ivy's final attempt at control, the week as a whole is already tilting toward exposure. That is why Ivy's actions on this day carry such tragic intensity. She is fighting hardest at the very moment she is closest to losing everything. She likely believes one more push can still secure the outcome she wants. One more argument. One more warning about Will. One more emotional nudge toward RJ. One more attempt to keep Elektra's eyes fixed on the future Ivy has chosen for her. But all such efforts are doomed now, not merely because truth is coming, but because the emotional violence of manipulation has reached a point where it cannot stay hidden. Even before the facts are fully revealed, Ivy's behavior is beginning to betray her. And when the truth does arrive, as it inevitably will, Wednesday's events will be reinterpreted through a harsher lens. Every warning Ivy gives will no longer sound protective. It will sound strategic. Every criticism of Will no longer sound concerned. It will sound self-serving. Every suggestion involving RJ will no longer sound thoughtful. It will sound orchestrated. That is the curse of exposure. Once the mask falls, even the gentlest gestures are remembered as calculated. Ivy's downfall will not come only from what she did in the past, but from how desperately she continued doing it right up until the moment the truth caught up with her. And so the episode becomes a study in converging pressures. Ridge tries to restore order in a workplace already stained by emotional conflict. RJ struggles with humiliation, anger, and a fragile masculinity that has led him to confuse desire with entitlement. Will reaches toward Elektra with hope, not realizing that he is stepping into the final hours of a lie much larger than he knows. Elektra stands at the center, asked to make a decision about the future while still trapped inside distortions of the past. And Ivy, sensing the walls closing in, sharpens her manipulation to its most dangerous point because she believes this may be her final opportunity to shape the ending. What makes it all so compelling is that no one involved can remain untouched. Even those who believe they are only offering advice are carrying their own fears into the moment. Ridge fears disorder and public embarrassment. RJ fears irrelevance and emotional defeat. Will fears losing Elektra for reasons he cannot yet fully name. Elektra fears making a choice that will cost her part of herself. Ivy fears losing control so completely that she will no longer be able to pretend her interference was ever love. Beneath every argument is fear. Beneath every warning is desire. Beneath every act of persuasion is a hidden need. That hidden need is the true engine of the drama. People in this world rarely say the real thing plainly. They say they want what is best, when what they mean is that they want to feel necessary. They say they are protecting someone, when what they mean is that they cannot bear being excluded from another person's becoming. They say they are worried about the family, when what they mean is that the family is the only mirror in which they know how to see themselves. Ivy embodies that pattern more nakedly than most. Her efforts to keep Elektra away from Will and fixed on RJ are not simply about romance or prudence. They are about preserving a version of herself as the wise guide, the trusted force, the one who still matters enough to direct fate. To lose that role would mean confronting the possibility that she has not been noble at all, merely controlling. Elektra's emerging choice, then, is not just a plot point. It is the moral center of the entire conflict. Whoever she chooses, or even if she chooses no one yet, what matters most is whether the choice becomes truly hers. That is the deeper promise of the coming revelation. Daphne's future confession will not merely expose Ivy's scheme. It will return reality to Elektra in a form painful enough to free her. She may be devastated. She may feel foolish. She may rage at herself for not seeing what others now insist should have been obvious. But freedom often arrives carrying shame, because recognizing manipulation means recognizing how deeply one has been influenced by it. The gift of truth is rarely gentle. Until that truth arrives, Wednesday remains suspended in tension. The office hums with aftershock from the fight. Ridge tries to reassert authority. RJ absorbs the sting of paternal warning. Will moves forward with careful hope. Ivy digs deeper into the role that is already destroying her. Elektra listens, weighs, hesitates, and feels the pressure of lives closing around her. Every conversation carries double meaning. Every gesture points toward a future not yet chosen. The day feels like an inhale before impact. By the end of it, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Ivy's plan to keep Elektra focused on RJ instead of Will is not simply failing because the wrong people are resisting it. It is failing because such plans are doomed from the moment they require another human being to remain emotionally blind. A manipulated future can last for a while, but it cannot breathe. It cannot adapt. It cannot survive the arrival of independent truth. And Elektra, whether Ivy realizes it or not, is moving toward that truth. Not because she is suddenly stronger than before, not because she has all the answers, but because the lies surrounding her are growing too loud to pass as love any longer. The cruel beauty of this storyline lies in that very shift. What once looked like concern begins to smell like possession. What once looked like guidance begins to sound like control. What once looked like a practical alternative begins to reveal itself as a manufactured path. And in that revelation, the emotional geometry of the story changes completely. Will is no longer merely the man asking for another chance. RJ is no longer merely the family-approved option. Ivy is no longer merely the protective aunt with strong opinions. Elektra is no longer merely the confused young woman at the center of competing affections. They all become something clearer, harsher, more human. A hopeful man, a wounded rival, a desperate manipulator, and a woman struggling to reclaim her own voice. That is why the episode matters. Not because it resolves everything, but because it tightens every thread before the unraveling begins. It shows Ridge trying to impose order on chaos he understands too well. It shows Ivy making perhaps her last and most desperate attempt to write Elektra's future for her. It shows Will mistaking an opening for a resolution, not yet realizing how much darkness still has to come into the light. And it shows Elektra standing on the threshold of a choice that will affect not only whom she loves, but how she understands trust, betrayal, and herself. In a series built on legacy, desire, and the endless collision between family and passion, moments like this are the ones that matter most. They strip away pretense. They reveal motive. They force characters to show who they are when the old scripts stop working. Ivy's efforts will not go according to plan. That much is already written in the emotional weather of the story. Her grip is weakening. Her panic is showing. And the truth, once spoken, will not merely ruin her strategy. It will expose the emptiness beneath it. Because in the end, the most devastating thing about manipulation is not that it changes outcomes. It is that it corrupts trust. It teaches people to doubt their own instincts, to misread love, to question their memories. When that corruption is finally exposed, the damage is severe, but so is the possibility of liberation. So as this chapter unfolds, the most important question is not whether Ivy can hold the line a little longer. She cannot. Nor is it whether Will and Elektra still have feelings for each other. They do. Nor even whether RJ will be hurt by the coming collapse. He will. The real question is whether Elektra, once the schemes are exposed and the pressure begins to lift, will finally find the courage to choose from a place that belongs only to her. That is the future trembling underneath every scene. And that is why Ivy's final attempt to keep Elektra's attention on RJ instead of Will is destined not just to fail, but to fail in a way that reveals